much early on in your career, you headed over to Canada and you had a chance to train at a specific wrestling gym that's pretty well known. Why don't you tell everyone who your trainer was over there and where you trained?
I trained at Battle Arts Academy, which was the head coach was Santino Marella, or Anthony Corelli, and the other head coach was Yuki Ishikawa. So two really good guys to learn from. That was about a year into my, I guess, wrestling journey, because I kind of figured, well, after the first year with Lee and APWG, it was like, not, at least my perception of it at the time was that there wasn't that much going on in Australia. So I wanted to go elsewhere and sort of see what I could find. So yeah, sort of threw a dart at a map. Toronto is easy to get to for an Australian. It was easy to get a visa. So, and what's the easiest gym to go to around there? I found Battle Arts and just kind of took a stab at it. Excuse me. And it worked out really well. In that the style that they train there is a lot of that sort of shoot wrestling and really that technical style. And they don't spend a lot of time on, I guess, moves or even like, running the ropes and timing drills. And like, there's not as much of that focus as there is on the mat-based stuff, which is the stuff that I really fell in love with.
Yeah. And did you find, like, obviously, Santino Marella, obviously, his gym is known as being a pro wrestling gym, but also an MMA gym. Did you find it was a lot of like crossover training, like you were doing a lot of MMA training while you were there as well? Or were you only focusing on the pro wrestling itself?
Yeah, we did. But it was to better the pro wrestling, if that makes sense. Like there are MMA fighters there, and they have kickboxers there that are just they're just there to kickbox, and they don't do any pro wrestling at all. And then they got wrestlers that dabble in kickboxing and dabble in jiu-jitsu and things like that. I had a crack at Muay Thai and kickboxing and stuff. Found it wasn't really for me. I liked it, but it was more, I guess, I really liked the jiu-jitsu and I really liked the pro wrestling. And obviously in pro wrestling, you have to lift weights. And then if you're doing kickboxing on top of that and then working a full-time job, it's just at a certain point, something's got to give. And for me, that was more the striking side of things, because I really love the grappling to the point where we do jiu-jitsu, almost every day, weights training almost every day, pro wrestling probably 3 or 4 times a week. So I got really into it. I went into a couple of jiu-jitsu tournaments over there, did reasonably well. And then that sort of, in a way, has shaped my style, pro wrestling.
Yeah. And how long were you there training with Santino? Yeah. Was he hands-on with your training when you were there?
Yeah. He's pretty hands-on. A little bit over 2 years.
Wow. That's a pretty decent stint to be away from home.
Yeah, loved it.
Were you working matches over there? Sorry.
Yeah. No. Yes, it's fine. I'd say I've probably worked more matches over there than I have here. It's probably catching up now, but I reckon I've probably worked more matches overseas than I have in Australia still, because I was over there for 2 years, and there's so many shows in Toronto that we'd usually have 2 matches a weekend. So we being, because over there predominantly I was a tag team wrestler with my partner Tony Cage in a tag team called the Ripperoos. We were in Canada, so we're like, hey, we're going to play on the Aussie thing as much as we can. So
did you come out to Tie Me Kangaroo Down Sport as the entrance music? Or?
No, even better, we came out to Land Down Under. So
that is so awesome.
And they loved it. But it was hard because it's one of those things where, at least I found, for the most part, promoters love to have that, the Aussie guys, they're different. We have an Aussie tag team. How different is that? No one else has seen that. But that like sort of gimmicky style, we were very rarely in the main event picture.
Yeah.
And me being, an ambitious guy, I wanted to find a way to kind of, I don't know whether or not to say, find the seriousness in the gimmick so that we could kind of push that envelope a little bit, if that kind of makes sense. So yeah, I mean, what ended up happening was Tony got at the time got signed to Impact Wrestling. And then we sort of split and started doing single stuff. And then I tried to take the shoot wrestling aspect of my style and try to work into a little bit more of a more disciplined, like slightly more serious style to try and, I guess, crack that ceiling, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, it definitely sounds more of like a real Aussie tough, hard nosed character that you sort of had yourself with, but
not at first. At first, we were taking photos with kangaroos and had boomerangs and stuff. It was over the top.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, you know, obviously going over to Canada, that would have been the obvious niche that they saw you guys with, where they're like, hey, man, look, let's get you with like this, you know, this tiny kangaroo down sport, and, you know, like, yeah, have you like come out to Men at Work and shit like that. But yeah, you know, that's the stuff that obviously Australian wrestling, probably over the last 20, 30 years, as guys have all gone through it. You look at Outback Jack, you look at guys like Mark Mercedes, even when he was doing his stuff in WCW and stuff in Japan back in the early 90s, it was still very much like that old Ocker Aussie attitude. And I think now, with where Australian wrestling's at and where pro wrestling's at, I think that those gimmicks aren't necessarily, I don't want to say not over. I think there's definitely a place for them, but I think that Australian wrestlers have been taken more seriously. You know what I mean? Like you don't see Buddy Murphy coming out there like bouncing on a kangaroo out. You know what I mean? Like he's in a good spot. It just happens to be he's Australian, but he has a gimmick. You know,
100%. And it also sort of, I guess, depends on where you're wrestling. Like if we go out and do a whole bunch of country shows on, you know, it was called Rib Fest, right? And that they'd have, you know, you'd go a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, you like that.
I saw you did that. Yeah.
In that, no, it's just what it's called, because they have these summer shows where you sort of go to the outskirts, I guess, you know, sort of like an hour out of the city or maybe further to these, I don't know, for lack of a better term, more rural towns. And, you know, in that audience is very different to a PWA audience or even a WWE audience, in that the WWE audience doesn't want to see you come out with kangaroos and being an idiot. But those kids that have never seen wrestling before and just are there to eat ribs and happen to go, oh, hey, a wrestling show, they're going to love that. They're going to absolutely love that. So the audience is, you know, depends. And that's, you know, I guess those stereotypical gimmicks don't necessarily work everywhere. But they are going to work in some places. Yeah. And obviously wrestling always needs to be a variety show, in that if every single person comes out and is, I'm serious, I'm tough, and I'm going to win the fight because I'm the greatest fighter in the world, it gets very boring very quickly. But when you have these more entertaining, lighthearted gimmicks to break up the show, it does make the whole product better.
And that's what I said when I had Jimmy Townsend, the prefect, on a couple of weeks ago, and that was something that
example.
It's a prime example, and like I think, and we spoke about it when we was on, and with that gimmick, if it would get over in the States, I think it would if it was tweaked, but in Australia, everyone. You know what I mean? Like the way he comes out to the ring, the way that he presents himself, and the way that he delivers a promo, everyone in Australia can understand that character. And like I said, if he was to go over to another country, obviously a couple of tweaks to make it more, you know, to their culture, absolutely, it could still be over just as much as it is here.
He'd get it over anyway.
Oh yeah, sure. He's a great guy. Great,
and I don't know if there's certain like this thing that's is that an Australian thing or is that
thing? I like, you mean like you going up? Oh yeah, you see it and you got to put
you do the circle and you get a free putt. Is that an Australian thing?
I don't know. Like, if we still have Americans in the audience, can you let us know?
On and ask him.
Australian thing. Gator, I'll send you a link, bro.
I don't know if there's aspects of the character that's maybe, you know, oh, that's particularly Australian. But, you know, a schoolboy and a student is pretty universal, like for any wrestling fan. There's no way he couldn't get that character over anyway. And those guys are so good at it, and they have such a good understanding of what to do when with their characters. Like even the way that, you know, in certain matches he'll have no offense but a schoolboy and it'll be perfect, and then in other matches he'll work his offense in such a creative way that doesn't take away from his opponent at all. Like, they're just so clever in how they do it.
And
So
especially
yeah, he could get over anyway.
And especially if they're doing it in a way that they're going to be able to try and get heat for a heel, like a heel beating the shit out of a young kid and just like beating out of a schoolboy. Like, that's the best way to get the crowd reaction to buy into it. And as him as a babyface, they're going to be like, to get him pumped up, to get him his comeback. So, no, I definitely agree. I think he's a great talent. But
I was the first person to get pinned by the schoolboy at PWA, and it's still one of the loudest pops I've ever heard.
Really?
Yeah, it's great.
Just because I think, for people who don't know, I think we